And the workers of America are getting, to put it very nicely, screwed. You're getting screwed. Yesterday, Joe Biden came to Michigan to pose for photos at the picket line. But it's his policies that send Michigan auto workers to the unemployment line.
But now we sit here and we try to push products people don't want. It's not convenience, it's a sacrifice.
The political push to force you to buy an electric car in many states hitting another little bit of a speed bump.
Cost is enormous. Batteries are much, much more expensive to put in a car than a gas tank.
Hey, excuse me. Your car is awesome. What do you do for a living?
Well, I'm married to Jill Biden to make sure we're making a lot more electric vehicles in America.
They're hoping, therefore, to get people, to force people to do what they have not voluntarily chosen to do.
If you're functioning with slave labor, we should not be doing business with you.
The auto industry is clearly moving toward electric. We need to make the shift faster.
We must be too big and too radical to ignore.
The history of the electric vehicle goes back to the beginning of the auto industry. You go back to the early 20th century, and there was multiple technologies out there. There were electric cars, there were natural gas powered cars, gasoline powered cars, all competing to become the technology for individual transportation.
A lot of people don't realize that electric vehicles actually started at the turn of the century. The first vehicles that Carl Benz created in the 1800s were electric.
With Detroit Electric and other manufacturers basically mass producing electric cars that used lead acid batteries. So they were slow, they didn't have much range.
The history of electric cars is interesting because they've been around as long as gasoline and even steam cars. The three drivetrain technologies all existed over 100 years ago and were being evaluated for basically market potential.
The gas engine won out. Henry Ford really figured it out with the Model T and the Ford, and that became the mass choice for individual transportation.
Steam was too tricky and difficult to create, had too many disadvantages, and electric cars also were too expensive and didn't give you the kind of energy density or cost effectiveness that gasoline cars provide.
They largely failed because they were hard to operate and they were expensive.
You were sitting on a bank of batteries. They didn't have a lot of range, and that really hasn't changed that much because technology has not evolved to the level that you're going to get super long distances, although there are a few companies that have actually created some pretty good sized batteries that have a longer distance.
And those are difficulties electric vehicles have to this day, where the electric vehicle revolution has been jump-started by Tesla. And Elon Musk had a new idea with lithium-ion batteries and with bringing performance into vehicles in a way that electric motors are uniquely qualified to do. They have very good low-end torque. And so Tesla basically resuscitated the electric vehicle industry a century after it died against Henry Ford and the Model T.
When most of us think electric car, we think of golf carts. Now, General Motors doesn't make golf carts, but they did make their first electric car in 1912. However, only with its impact and HX3 concepts of the early 1990s did GM get serious about a modern electric car. The result is the GM EV1.
GM believed in the future of electrification, and in I think the late 1990s, in there someplace, introduced the EV1.
The EV1 is GM's first totally electric, non-combustible fuel-on-board passenger vehicle. It was developed after years of careful research and development to achieve zero emissions.
General Motors had the EV1. It didn't turn out as planned. People that bought them on lease didn't like them. They had to be leased, and in the end, they were crushed.
They were hard to maintain. It was basically an experimental product. GM wouldn't sell them to people, it leased them to people. And finally, GM decided to cancel the program, and GM ordered them all basically crushed and scrapped.
The government's involvement in vehicle powertrains started over 50 years ago when they started to try to control emissions. And that just got more aggressive in the last 20 years or so. Really, it was the California Air Resources Board, known as CARB, that was one of the first agencies, government agencies, to come up with the idea of zero emissions and vehicles that emitted nothing out of the tailpipe.
California has really been the leader for some time in mandating electric vehicles. You go back to 1990, and it was already introducing regulations for so-called zero-emission vehicles. Zero emission being zero emission at the tailpipe. The production of batteries is, in fact, very energy intense. But for those who want to regulate the consumer, the idea of regulating automobiles as zero-emission products has been very attractive.
And the tricky part is that when you include carbon dioxide as an emission, which all of us are emitting right now, essentially it means you can't have an internal combustion engine, no matter how clean it is. You have to have something that has no tailpipe emissions. It's ironic in my mind because I remember when the EPA had to request money from the federal government's parent agencies to upgrade all of their testing equipment because they could no longer effectively measure the emissions coming out of vehicles. This was over 20 years ago because internal combustion engines had become so clean.
You've got governments that, for political, I don't know whether they believe it themselves, but they feel that they need to reduce CO2.
These are very green politicians. They believe that we're in an existential crisis. They believe that their coasts will be underwater in the next few decades because of the climate crisis. And so I think they see this as they often say, as a war. This is like World War II, in which the United States has to mobilize, go to completely sustainable energy, otherwise we're doomed.
Here, I've got an experiment for you. Safety glasses on. By the end of this century, if emissions keep rising, the average temperature on Earth could go up another 4 to 8 degrees. What I'm saying is the planet's on fire.
By 2050, pollution may be so bad, there might not be fresh air to breathe.
You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. How dare you?
And the accumulated amount is now trapping as much extra heat as would be released by 600,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every single day on the Earth. That's what's boiling the oceans, creating these atmospheric rivers and the rain bombs and sucking the moisture out of the land and creating the droughts and melting the ice and raising the sea level and causing these waves of climate refugees predicted to reach 1 billion in this century.
People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth.
This is a climate damn emergency. This is real.
The devastating toll of climate change and its existential threat to all of us, and is the ultimate threat to humanity.
So lead, follow, or get out the way.
This issue is one of the issues, the biggest issue of our time, and because of that, we must be too big and too radical to ignore.
Hey everybody, here on the ground in North Carolina, we're starting our summer road trip, talking about the investments in America as a result of the President's Investing in America agenda. We'll be taking electric vehicles on this road trip, and I'm very excited to point out all of the investments that are happening, creating jobs, especially in South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia. Follow along.
Okay, folks, you can't make this stuff up. Okay, just recently, Secretary of on a 4-day road trip in her electric vehicle. to draw attention to the billions of dollars that the greenies in the White House are pouring into their electric vehicle fantasy.
I love the story of Jennifer Granholm, who decided that she was going on an EV road trip. She's not the only one that's done, a couple other officials have, and they found it to be an absolute disaster.
And she quickly ran into the same problem that a lot of customers do when they drive electric vehicles, and that is electric charging infrastructure is scarce, and even when you find it, it takes a long time to charge at an electric vehicle station.
Well, what they did is they knew that she would need to charge, so they would go there and park a regular gasoline-powered vehicle in the charging bay. And while they were waiting for her to show up so she could plug right in, like it was just that way for everyone, all, of course, you know, smoke and mirrors, there was a family that had pulled up that had a baby in the car, and they needed to charge, and they wouldn't move.
It was a really hot day. A family actually called the police on them.
Columbia County 911.
Hi, I'm calling because I'm in the Grovetown Walmart at the charging station, and there's literally a non-electric car that is taking up the space who says they're holding the space for somebody else, and it's holding up a whole bunch of people who need to charge their cars.
That's not a luxury that most consumers have. They don't have a staff that can go ahead of them on a road trip and reserve an electric charger for them.
Are they still there?
They're still here, but one spot opened up, which is like not them, but there's other people who are waiting to charge, and they're still here, and they're not an electric car, and the sign says that it has to, you can't park here unless you're charging.
She was driving her Chevy Bolt. She had to be on schedule, and so her staff went ahead to the electric vehicle charger that she was due to charge at and parked in the electric vehicle spot in order to reserve the spot for her so that nobody else took it, so that she didn't have to wait and could get right into the electric vehicle charger, charge her car, and get back on the road.
The police showed up, and I guess there's no statute in Georgia that makes it illegal for a gas-powered car to sit and block or save a spot. Not yet. Maybe there will be after this. The secretary did show up, and there was some heated discussions, but eventually the caravan got on, but not before the police was called on the Secretary of Energy, which doesn't happen every day.
Of course, that became a PR disaster. It was a nightmare to prove that they had to move eventually to let the people with the baby in their car charge, you know, the heat and everything.
Is it true that you had a staffer in a gas-powered, one of your representatives parked in an electric charging spot to reserve the position for you so that you could do it and not be deterred from your travels? Is that accurate?
It was poor judgment on the part of the team.
Well, why do you think, and poor judgment, but why do you think they did that?
I can only imagine they wanted to continue moving.
Let's call it what it is, folks. It is a road to nowhere.
% of all passenger vehicles sold by 2030 will be electric.
When we look at what Joe Biden did with EV mandates, you have to understand that this is the bureaucracy at work. When you hear that term, you might wonder, what exactly does that mean? These are trusted agencies that corrupt politicians use to their advantage. So just like during COVID, we started to question the things that were happening at the CDC, now you have to look at the Environmental Protection Agency, which sounds like a great agency, but now you have to look at this and say, well, how exactly is he using this to essentially create law without the lawmakers involved?
Now the Biden administration wants to accelerate the green revolution with tougher emission standards, and industry sources say requiring that EVs make up at least 54% of automakers' new car sales by 2030.
He had the EPA create a rule, and it is the strictest environmental rule we've ever seen on tailpipes, which then in turn forces our automakers into making electric vehicles so that they can meet these requirements. And so what he's done is he said, you have to have between 2030 and 2032, more than half of your fleet has to be electric vehicles.
So if you tell automakers that they're going to be fined if they produce cars that have any form of emissions, including CO2, then they cannot financially produce internal combustion vehicles and make a profit. And that forces them to consider electric vehicle technology and try to incorporate it. Ironically, electric vehicles also haven't proven profitable so far for them, so they're kind of stuck where they can't sell internal combustion engine vehicles at a profit because they're being fined by the government, and they can't sell electric vehicles at a profit because they cost too much to produce, and if they charged enough to make a profit, nobody would buy them.
All the consumer sees is that they are seeing the ads
from their local auto dealer, and they see the prices when they go visit the lot at the average Chevrolet or Toyota dealer, and the prices are going through the roof, and they have no way of knowing whom to blame. They don't know if it's the dealer that is gouging them. They don't know if it's the automaker that is somehow extracting excess profits or some other nefarious scheme against them. But in reality, the fault is solely found in a single place, and it's the government.
It's purely political. And I happen to know from back when Joe Biden was vice president, he occasionally made contributions to car magazines like Car and Driver. And Joe Biden, this is one of his more endearing traits, is actually a car fan. And he likes old Pontiac GTOs and Chevy Camaros and Chevy Corvettes. I think his stand on electric vehicles is politically motivated.
We're talking about a group of people that have been in place coming out of California about 15 to 20 years ago, and slowly but surely growing in influence in all of these 2, 3, and 4-letter agencies.
Just footage of just getting on a bike in his suit.
Of which there are more of them than names in the Boston phone book. So there are now thousands of these hardcore so-called self-described environmentalists.
Gasoline, gasoline, you're driving me insane. Gasoline, gasoline, the world's aflame. Gotta go quick, electric, change the way we move around.
They basically, at the end of the day, they hate cars. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. So little by little, step by step, they want to end personal transportation.
The political push to force you to buy an electric car in many states hitting another little bit of a speed bump. Thousands of auto dealers are now calling for President Biden to, quote, tap the brakes on the unrealistic government electric vehicle mandate. Their words.
What's happening is the manufacturer is being forced to produce these EVs. They're shipping them to the dealerships, and they're backing up on the lots. You know, our average day supply pre-COVID was 60 to 90 days supply of inventory. During COVID, it was less than 30 because of the supply chain issues. We're now backed up to 12 months with EVs. Consumers don't want them. They're not buying them.
The government's timeline, which originally was no more internal combustion engines by 2030, is at odds with the American public's timeline, which says, yeah, I think they're okay. I may try one, or if I have a second car, I may have one for local use, but for long distance, I'm going to keep my IC engine car. So the public is not on the same timeline, and therein lies the big problem.
Major manufacturers have halted R&D into gas engines, and they're putting all of their research and development into electric vehicles. So I think they see for now, for the short term, no choice but to build electric vehicles because you have government mandates from California to Washington, D.C., across Europe, and in China, which are the 3 major consumer markets.
These cars weigh 30% more than a combustion engine. If you are looking at a gas-powered vehicle, it weighs much less than an electric vehicle. So suddenly you look at states like Michigan, our roads are crumbling. Now you're going to take vehicles that weigh 30% more, put them on crumbling roads, and expect these vehicles and the roads to hold up. You're going to end up with a complete disaster.
EVs, for example, they weigh more than a regular automobile. So these batteries tend to be very heavy, and they tend to weigh, on average, a few hundred pounds more. What does that mean? That means that they have more expensive tires, tires that shred more. And few people know this, but one of the biggest environmental issues with automobiles is just tire shredding, all this rubber that comes out there. And that is something that EVs cause a far bigger impact than non-EVs.
They're saying from the infrastructure standpoint, where are you going to charge these cars? You don't have enough power, and you don't have enough stations to actually power these cars.
Lower middle class and working class people who live in dense cities and have to park in the streets, they can't go to an electric vehicle because there's no place to get it charged.
Only 67% of America actually has a garage. So we're going to drop a cord from your 10th story apartment building? That doesn't work. I live in New York and I'm not buying an electric car. It doesn't work for me and it doesn't work for a lot of people. And because I live in Buffalo, we have cold weather and the upper half of the country knows what range anxiety is. And we saw this in Chicago over the past winter.
Tesla drivers learned the hard way about how cold weather impacts their battery life. This was the scene this morning at a charging station near 95th and Western in Evergreen Park.
The cold weather is also impacting electric vehicles. The popularity of the cars paired with drivers depending on charging stations created the perfect storm today, leaving many without their vehicles.
Drivers say some of the stations weren't working and those that were taking a lot longer to charge.
I've been here for over 5 hours at this point, and I'm still have not got to charge my car. Charge it should take 45 minutes. It's taken 2 hours.
The whole thing is a disaster waiting to happen. But again, you're looking at a politician who has weaponized government agencies against the automakers now. I mean, we've seen this weaponized against the people. We've seen this weaponized against other politicians. But now you're seeing a government agency weaponized against our producers, against our manufacturers. And so you have to ask yourself, how far can they take this? If they can take one agency and create a rule that will hurt our manufacturers, what other companies and what other individuals can this happen to?
I think that Biden has overreached dramatically in suggesting that he would mandate EVs, and we're moving in that direction. I think that people do not want you to mess with their cars. They do not want to be forced to buy electric vehicles. And in effect, what they're trying to do, the left is trying to do, is to take that which the marketplace has explicitly rejected and is not buying, and use the regulatory framework to require it. And they're hoping, therefore, to get people to force people to do what they have not voluntarily chosen to do.
Promised to give $715 million to Goen, a high-tech battery company.
Yeah, the company plans to build multi-billion-dollar electric vehicle battery plant in the city of Big Rapids. But as our next guest points out, in Goen's bylaws, get this, the company pledges allegiance to the Constitution of the Communist Party of China.
They require a CCP, a Chinese Communist Party organization, in the factory to influence the grassroots of the factory, so obviously the workers.
New development tonight on the plans to build a multi-billion-dollar EV battery plant in Mecosta County.
We announced Goen yesterday in Big Rapids. That is a massive project.
This has become quite the issue up there. Why is this a bad idea?
The parent company, Goen High Tech, is based in China.
This is my finger. This is a national security risk. You are elected officials to represent, and you have not represented it.
This came up during the campaign, and having been a manufacturer my whole career, I immediately got it. I knew what China had done to manufacturing in the United States. I knew what they had done to our factory. And I understood the impact of this immediately. We actually stopped on the side of the road. We're like, we've got to get a video out to make sure people understand this. Hi, everyone. We're just hearing that the legislature and Gretchen Whitmer are working together to put hundreds of millions of dollars worth of taxpayer money into a Chinese corporation that will be building a battery plant in the state of Michigan. This is something we have to hold Gretchen Whitmer accountable for. Your taxpayer dollars should be used to make sure your kids are getting a world-class education. You have a reliable infrastructure, that you have safe cities. But now we're seeing taxpayer dollars go into an adversary, a Chinese corporation. And the funny thing about this is, like, as we do this, suddenly we're getting all these media inquiries, and then media, even the conservative media, so desperate for a win in Michigan, I think. And I really believe that. There was such a lack of jobs. There's so little hope in this state that in that moment, I think they were all like, how could you attack jobs? Not understanding what was coming in. It's like the wolf in sheep's clothing. They had no idea. And I think unless you have a background in this, it's hard to right off the bat get it, but we got it. We talked about it as we were bringing this up more. We were so fortunate to have folks like State Senator Lana Theis, Congressman John Moolenaar going into this information and saying, wow, she's right. This stuff is bad. This company could really be detrimental to the state. And to this day, I still go back to that and say, I wish more people were paying attention when these Chinese companies would come into our states.
Their claim is that they are a separate entity from Goan High-Tech in China. This is Goan Inc., supposedly out of San Francisco. But the presentation they gave us in the Appropriations Committee specifically had the patent for Goan High-Tech showing their headquarters based out of China. That information was already available to us at the point that the committee decided to go ahead and appropriate funds. I voted against it, by the way, but appropriated funds into the Economic Development Corporation in order for them to go to Goan itself.
The bureaucracy came through for Goan and said, we're going to take taxpayer money, give it to a Chinese manufacturer, and we're going to all sign NDAs so no one will know about it. At that point, the people of Michigan started to talk about what was going on, and they went to one of our local news companies called The Midwesterner. Once The Midwesterner really started to talk about what was going on in Goan, how much they could find out about what was happening with the bylaws, the connection to the CCP, we started to hear from some of our elected officials, and Congressman John Moolenaar got really involved at that point. He started saying, wait a minute, how could this possibly happen in the United States? How are we suddenly giving up our land to a Chinese-connected company? He started to find out their connection to slavery in China. He started to figure out the connection to the environmental issues. He started to expose this on a different level and took it back to Washington and said, we can't be allowing this in the United States.
Our select committee on the Chinese Communist Party has the ability to investigate different issues, even have subpoena power. And in this investigation, we looked at these Chinese battery manufacturers that are affiliated with the CCP. And what we learned is within their supply chains, they are working with companies affiliated with the CCP that are tied to the ongoing genocide of the Uyghur Muslims.
Over the past several months, the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party undertook a thorough investigation of the supply chains of two leading Chinese electric vehicle battery producers, Goan High-Tech and CATL. Goan and CATL source products or services directly from companies involved in the Chinese Communist Party's ongoing genocide against the Uyghurs.
But we were able to establish the link of Goan CATL with the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps, which basically oversees a forced labor camp and rents out employees to people like Goan, CATL, and their subsidiaries.
There's a baseline here. If you're functioning with slave labor, we should not be doing business with you.
We have a federal law called the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act that requires that companies that are affiliated with slave labor be put on an entity list that would prohibit them from selling products or services in the United States.
There's no excuse for us to partner with an organization that has those kind of policies. They're willing to do it, they just don't want us to see it. Well, if it's wrong in another country, it's wrong in the United States, and we shouldn't be partnering with them. We shouldn't be handing them money in order to encourage foreign investment in Michigan that's not moral.
Once we started to break it down, not only was this battery factory coming in from China, with ties to China, the parent company actually has ties to Iran. This was a company that was also going to have no environmental review.
They don't want to discuss the impact that this could have on the environment. You've not heard them talking about the fires. Well, if you go on and you Google electric vehicle fire, you're going to see what that looks like all across the world. It's not just here in the U.S. It's all over, and it's a huge problem. It's extraordinarily dangerous. What happens if a fire were to start? Lithium is highly combustible.
The fire engulfed a lithium battery plant in minutes, trapping workers inside. One eyewitness who escaped says it was started by a spark from a single battery. Firefighters say they saw many blow up.
For Goan and Mecosta, for example, they've made no accommodation for a fire response at all. The township where it's based out of doesn't have their own fire department. The closest one doesn't. Were they to send all of their equipment to the plant, if there was just smoke, They don't even come close to being able to respond. It proves that the agenda is much more important than the environment. It's also much more important than the citizens.
I mean, if you think about it, in the United States and in the world, we're one of the greatest sources of fresh water with the Great Lakes. We're going to put a Chinese factory right here, and then we start finding out, man, it's going to use more water than Nestle. There's no environmental review.
The amount of water usage. When Nestle wanted to take out less, there was a huge uproar. But now they're completely dismissing the amount of water that's going to be used, and they sit on top of a massive watershed that feeds into a water system that goes into our Great Lakes.
So about March, April, the local townspeople start saying, this is not okay. And they start to go to their local meetings and their county meetings, and they're saying, we're not okay with this.
Talk a little bit about your concerns with the project.
I have a lot of environmental concerns. They're wanting to put this on a watershed that with streams that lead to the Muskegon River. The chemicals that they want to bring in, they haven't disclosed exactly what kind of chemicals they want to put in or use.
I credit people on the ground in Green Township and throughout Mecosta County who raised these concerns about the ties between Goshen and the Chinese Communist Party.
And then it starts to break out what the township board has done and how involved they've been. And there's potentially a lot of corruption there, that you've got this one board member who has property that Goshen is going to buy.
One thing is that they have always used bribery as their method of advancing nationally.
So we start to see the local townspeople say, we're recalling these people.
Polls close in just under an hour in West Michigan. People living in Green Charter Township in Mecosta County will decide the fate of 5 of their board members.
They're corrupt. They're bringing in a factory. We don't know the environmental impact.
The petition was filed by voters to recall the Green Township supervisor, clerk, treasurer, and 2 trustees after claims that the township wasn't listening to the public when it comes to Goshen.
And in effect, they recalled the entire township board that had been going further in approving this, and have selected new township officials who then can do their due diligence on this project.
In Mecosta County's Green Charter Township, people voted to recall 5 members of the township board. Jason Cruz won over the current supervisor, James Chapman, by 60% to 40%.
All 5 tonight now replaced.
And then when we talk, it was look at me instead of the camera. So yeah.
We're going to be much more transparent and look for our constituents' inputs before we move forward, especially on large projects that can totally change the environment and the area of our community.
It's a situation where, people say you can't beat City Hall. Well, these individuals, everyday people in Mecosta County really stood up, had their voices heard, and are making a huge difference.
Why is it that these big, powerful car companies with guys that are making $35 million a year immediately quit? They say, you want electric vehicles, we'll give it to you, when the damn things don't go far enough and they're too expensive.
Trump, coming from the private sector, is very consumer-oriented. I mean, he's also has an element of industrial policy in his plans, and that he wants to produce products in the United States. A big piece of Make America Great Again is to slap import duties on everything from Chinese products to Mexican products. So he wants products made in the United States. He thinks the consumer ought to decide what kind of products to buy.
Donald Trump is the ultimate capitalist. He understands the importance of business, and he understands the importance of creating jobs, but he also understands the customer. And here he understands the customer doesn't want this. EVs are not selling.
The Trump administration, the first Trump administration, was very aggressive in suing California, saying California did not have the right, as a violation of interstate commerce, to mandate that manufacturers could make only electric vehicles.
The administration's proposal, among other things, would freeze mileage standards at 2020 levels, meaning after that, automakers would not have to continue making vehicles more fuel efficient. It would also revoke California's ability to set stricter emission standards and could change our state's mandate requiring automakers to sell a certain number of electric vehicles.
He has consistently said this should not be a government mandate. This should not be government getting in the way of business. If the consumers want this, then this is for the automakers to decide. However, the environmentalists are saying, no, we're going to actually push this. And I think that he's the only one standing in the way of making these automakers essentially probably go under.
Donald Trump has stated at many of his events that he is against having a mandate. He's saying if you want to purchase an electric car, you should.
I think Trump is opposed to mandating anything like that. Let people buy what they want and let the free market determine the pricing, which it's doing.
If you don't believe in climate Armageddon caused by automobiles, the intelligent thing is to let the public here, China, Europe, everywhere, decide when the right time is to switch from an internal combustion engine vehicle to a battery-operated one.
What we really want to do is help American enterprise. What we need to do is stop the unnecessary regulations, the things that don't actually contribute to the well-being and health of our citizenry, and allow American ingenuity to drive the industry. We've done it before, we can do it again.
So what year did you hire in at Ford?
99.
You've got so many auto workers, going back in time that always voted Democrat because the union leadership said, hey, vote your jobs, vote Democrat.
It was me.
Well, meanwhile, NAFTA was getting signed into law.
Yep.
And our plants were closing.
Everything we voted for was cutting our own throats.
Right.
Every time.
So people were waking up to that. And now with these EV mandates, it's another case of that. We're cutting our own throats. So people need to wake up. Fain went along with that. We got a big bribe from the government. He should have fought for the workers, for the jobs. To keep
like I said, he should have at least said, I'm going to remain neutral or endorse Trump. One of the two. You should not endorse the hand that is smacking you around and going to destroy your membership.
UAW family, today I'm proud to stand up here with your International Executive Board and announce that the UAW is endorsing Joe Biden for President of the United States. Well, the United Auto Workers Union is taking a new stand in the race for president tonight with an endorsement for Vice President Kamala Harris.
After we had Trump, a 4-year term, we saw what he did. He tore up the horrible NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement.
Jobs came back.
It's my great honor to announce that we have successfully completed negotiations on a brand new deal to terminate and replace NAFTA and the NAFTA trade agreements with an incredible new U.S., Mexico, Canada agreement called USMCA.
So it forced the Mexican automakers that are down there to pay a much higher wage, leveled the playing field, and was much better. He expanded the drilling and oil exploration in America, opened up
and started using the modern technologies. That's the thing, is like, we're innovative. This whole save the planet stuff, well, dude, we're also innovative. All these different things we've done it by innovation. Now we have new technologies to actually sonar through the soil and actually find better cavities of oil that we never knew were there before. It's more efficient drilling, all these different things. Nobody wants to talk about that. They just want to talk about these EVs.
We were oil independent. We're actually an oil exporter. Got our gas prices down to below $2 a gallon.
And I believe we teetered between 1 and 2 in the world in exports of oil. Under Trump.
So Joe Biden comes in, he stops all drilling. And starts mandating, by certain dates, we're going to build more and more electric vehicles. Well, China, all we're doing is making ourselves more dependent on China because they have cornered a lot of those.
Over 90% of the components are all dominated by China.
And they've got the rare earth minerals, the things, all the materials needed.
Mined by slave labor, Uyghur Muslims, Tibetans, all the other things over there. The Congo kids that, blood diamond's bad, but cobalt for your EV is good.
So it's all a mirage. It's all a mirage. The average guys, the guys who build the vehicles, the consumers like you and me, the guys who sit around and talk about it and have a beer after work, we know all these things. We never got asked. So Joe Biden and the elites thought they could dictate to the auto industry what we're going to do, and all under the guise of it being a Green New Deal, and it's going to be good for the environment. Well, if you go over to where they mine these rare earth minerals,
including at 300 times the rate,
exactly.
Out of sight, out of mind, all of a sudden we don't live on the same planet.
So the people in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York can drive around in fully electric vehicles
and pat themselves on the back how green they are, like they saved the planet, even though it just came out. It's ironic, right before this, the brakes and the tires pollute more than the tailpipes of modern cars.
The F-150 is the world's most popular and trusted truck, and the F-150 Lightning will be the smartest, cleanest F-150 ever. Just yesterday, President Biden was in Dearborn, and somehow he convinced the Secret Service to let him drive the truck on our test track.
Mr. President!
This sucker's quick.
How's it drive? Mr. President, would you buy one of these?
I would.
They launched that F-150 Lightning that never took off. The plant chairman said, we're going to have 4 shifts and, we're going to run 312s and all this other crazy stuff. And literally within a matter of weeks, we went from this whole buzz of everything's great to we're cutting 2 shifts. And mind you, the 3 shifts they had going, the ABC crew, they never ran all at the same time. They were laid off all the time because nobody wanted the trucks.
If there is a second term for the Biden administration, I think we're going to have a lot of problems.
The further the administration in a second term tries to push that mandate into the 85% of customers who prefer gas electric vehicles, it's going to get very dicey.
Biden and his administration would love to see a fulfillment of the requirements that they've put in place, but I think market forces could maybe force a reevaluation of that. But the problem is how much pain will we go through before that happens?
We've seen a massive loss in market share from the big 3 to where we're currently at. And I think we can get it back. I have a lot of hope for this. I think we can get it back if we just let them make what people want instead of telling people what they have to have.
Well, I saved the American auto industry once, and now I will save it again.